Hello, and welcome to Champions of Psychology, a show with the goal of openly talking about mental health and gaming presented by Codename Entertainment and TakeThis.org. Every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time here on twitch.tv/CNE Games, Mitra Jordan and Raffael Boccamazzo, aka Dr. B, talking about mental health and how gaming affects us. If you're this live in the chat, you can leave a question that I, Treavor Bettis, will ask them later in the show. As a heads up, don't put that code in yet because it's wrong. We're getting a new one updated here. It will be in chat, I think, by the time that was going on right now. So, I'm going to get that change here in a moment. But hey, we're back. And before we kind of really celebrate that we're back, who are you two for the fine folks who may not know?
Oh, I may have forgotten how to do this.
Right?
Oh, here we go.
I had to read off the script again because I didn't remember how to do it.
I'm Mitra Jordan. I'm a registered clinical counselor working in Victoria, British Columbia. I see families, individuals, all kinds of people, all sorts. And I love games. And sometimes that comes up in clinical work. And I support the therapeutic use of games, which my colleague, who has a long Italian name, and so we shorten it for long Italian name reasons, but I'll hand it over.
Man, she stole your joke.
Are you going to throw that in my face? Hey, Trevor,
also.
Where was our intro screen? Where was the oboe?
Oh, I did forget it. Oh, no. I'm a terrible person.
I'm going to have to start just trying to imitate an oboe over here, and it's going to be awful.
It would have been great if just in the middle of your sentence, I just cut straight to it.
That would have been appropriate too if you just cut me off. No, we're not dealing with him.
Yeah.
We're not dealing with him.
You see, once I got going, I just wanted to keep going. It was like the open road. What do you want from me? Anyway.
I think we're definitely going to do the oboe in the middle of the show. We got to have the oboe back. I got a fever.
I got a fever.
And the only prescription is more oboe.
Oboe. Mobo.
More oboe.
Oh, boy.
I'm Dr. B for long Italian name reasons. I'm a clinical psychologist in Washington State. I am the clinical director at Take This, the oldest and first mental health nonprofit in the game industry, celebrating our 10th year. Make sure to go check out some wonderful free resources we have, especially for Mental Health Month, at takethis.org. And I'm also an expert on the applied use of role-playing games in clinical and learning settings. And yeah, I get around. But I'm here now, and we're talking about post-pandemic paradigm shift because we love that alliteration.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that we're forgetting how to run this show is so appropriate.
It's so appropriate. And the funny thing is, it hasn't even really been that long. It was March.
No, it's been 1 month.
March.
Yeah.
1 month, man.
It's been
this is what
just
happens
a little
when we
over
take
1
more
month.
than 2 weeks. We're like, what do I do with my
habits
hands?
Habits are tough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They're tough to establish, and that's probably a future episode. But for now, the habits that we established before the pandemic that then we had to stop, and of course the habits we started on during the pandemic that certainly have affected us now.
Yeah. No. I looked like a sports coach before the pandemic, and I decided to start growing hair, and it just kept going and going and going and going, and now
growing and growing.
Now I look like I'm the geekiest kid at the Witcher convention. So
I do remember in our first meeting for this show, your beard was longer than your hair. And
that was a charity thing.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, well, I mean, why are we talking about this? Because we've done a couple of pandemic shows before over the last 7 previous seasons. Where I know, right? But wow. As the United States is starting to move out of emergency measures for the pandemic, and there's just a lot of folks moving past pandemic precautions that we were taking and so forth. What are the ramifications of this? Especially given that, people are still getting sick from COVID. Just for the week of the 26th of April, we had 88,000 new cases in the United States, 1,000 deaths that week from COVID, and 10,000 new hospital admissions. But we're just not talking about it as much. We're not, not everybody is taking the same degree of precautions. And that creates a lot of what we're going to end up talking about today, the discrepancies between how people are treating this still existing problem. I mean, we haven't even talked about long COVID. Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and what I notice in Canada, particularly, well, across Canada, COVID reporting has certainly changed. Where you see COVID reporting is, it's sort of in wastewater reporting around viral load and changing viral load over time. But it's not as easy to. I'm sure that if I worked harder to look for it, spent more time, I probably would have found more data. But the thing is, of course, before you didn't actually have to work hard to find the data; it was right there. So I noticed a shift there, and of course, that also reflects on where our money is spent, where our resources go, and just how much interest or continuing interest and curiosity there is about COVID. Mostly, I think a lot of people are very tired of COVID. But that doesn't mean people aren't getting COVID.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there's cases. I think there's fewer deaths from cases, but COVID still has the capacity to kind of stop a person's life, and maybe in some cases stop travel still, and certainly long-term effects are still not well known. So.
Well, and I mean, but the part of the challenge is that as a lot of people are socializing again to varying degrees, I've got friends who are immunocompromised who are still taking things quite seriously, as they should. And I've got friends who are taking more risks, and everybody seems to be at different places.
Yeah.
In their willingness to take risks. And I don't know if the two of you have noticed this, but I've certainly noticed that it creates tension.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it creates tension because as I like this to say this, there are some people who are practicing safe COVID in the sense that it matters in their lives that they do so. They may, as you said, have immunocompromised partners. They may have had COVID and had a really poor response to COVID. We do know, of course, that some people get more sick than others. And so there are certainly some people who've had more issues and so are much more cautious, and others who are much more relieved that COVID doesn't seem to have been as big a deal in terms of their encounters with it. And for some people, it's been no worse than a cold or a mild flu. And so they are more willing. And maybe they don't have elder family members or people who are as much at risk in their lives, or they feel more confident. And so that really does change how you interact with people and their rules. Like I will still have some people who come see me and they'd still prefer to work virtually. I have some who can't wait to just be in person. I have some who will mask in session and some who won't. And I'm comfortable with whatever my clients need to do, of course. The variation is interesting, and the struggle to sort of talk about where you're at and how you're wanting to socialize, or if you're wanting to socialize as much. I think that's really tough for people. And it's harder because I think through COVID, we lost a lot of acquaintances. What I notice is that aside from one's closest friends and one's circle may really have shrunk, it's pretty tough to be like, for some of us to be like, hey, I haven't seen you in 3 years, but what you doing Tuesday? You know what I mean? So I think that's tough for people.
Oh, 100%.
Definitely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I kind of want to throw this question out there to the chat. Like, for those of you who are socializing at various levels, I'm really curious how many of you kind of forgot how to people. Like, I don't know. For me, I became suddenly more aware of all of the stressors that existed with socializing and all the stuff that I just kind of took for granted and was used to. I got overwhelmed so much easier when I started socializing again. I found I had less tolerance for being around people. I don't stay at gatherings as long. I just kind of want to retreat back to the Dr. B cave. And
Dr. B.
It's perplexing how being around people now, because it's like the old rules, they either don't exist anymore, or we now have to reestablish what the social rules are. And that's the, the basis of our episode title of this paradigm shift.
One of the ones for me is that I noticed not too long ago is I forgot about just hanging out with people. Like my friends and I will go to a bar weekly, and we've been doing that since we've been doing it off and on since late 2021 when we were all vaccinated and everything. And depending on like the numbers, like we'd stop going or whatnot, but we've been going pretty regularly. But like that's in my head because I had so long of nothing. I'm like, that's the time that I hang out with people. I forget that I can just call some of them and be like, hey, do you want to hang out and go do something? It just doesn't register to me.
I think I also have fewer people to hang out with. I had a broader range of acquaintances and people that we would do specific things together. And I really found through COVID that that group kind of fell away, and it's been harder to reestablish because some people have moved away. So there's been a lot of movement over 3 years that basically has left me with a couple of quite close friends. And in my city, not really a lot of other people. And I hadn't realized that I'm not hugely extroverted, which is to say, I always knew I was kind of more of an ambivert, like neither an extrovert nor an introvert. But I don't think that I had understood how much socializing could take it out of me. But through not having to do that, or in fact having to not do that, what I felt through serious COVID times was loss and longing to socialize, without the recognition, understandably, I guess, that beyond my really close, intimate circle, where I feel very enriched when we're together, there's actually a lot of socializing I used to do, which was kind of nice and fun, but I hadn't realized how exhausting it was, that it actually took more than it gave. At the same time, those broader groups of people were also a source of potential close people.
Yeah.
But because they weren't as close, of course, it takes it out of you, but it's still an opportunity to sort of get to know people and possibly move into greater closeness, So losing that group of people where it's just that little bit more stressful, but there's still potential good friends you could make, meant that, I'm left with people where I do feel really enriched. But then when I have to again be in situations that bring up that stress we're talking about, I feel more exhausted. And therefore, it's actually harder to keep those relationships up, to get the momentum enough to maybe create that broader group. Does that?
Well, I mean, you're bringing up this idea of loss.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that like Luke McKay brought this up in the chat as well. And, we're just going to, let's get real with this. A lot of us, not just lost friends, we lost people.
Yeah.
And, for many of us, there's this compounded grief as we at different paces have started to sort of reintegrate into whatever our new normal is. And I suspect for a lot of folks, that grief of either social loss or physical loss of people is just compounding this confusion. And essentially, I think this was you who brought this up in our pre-planning meeting, Mitra. What is our new normal?
Very much so. Yeah, because now, in terms of sort of maybe trying to broaden that group a little bit, I'm asking the sorts of questions I would never have asked before.
Right.
Are you practicing safe COVID? Like, what's your boundary around it?
Right.
Because I recently kind of chatted to someone who was like, yeah, I only want to meet outside. And it's like, okay, that's important to you. But of course, that limits to when we can get together and what the weather is like and, all that sort of thing. So that was interesting. The other thing that just occurred to me as we're talking about this is the stress of big visits. So
Oh my God,
last year,
yes.
yeah, for the first time, I got to see my folks whom I hadn't seen since 2019. And they're older and they were super worried about COVID. And,
Yeah.
it was a high anxiety visit in that sense. In fact, there were two because there was one failed visit because my son and I got COVID right after we arrived. We tested, we realized we got COVID. We were in a hotel room for that first night. And then we couldn't visit with them. And so I know, sort of noticing that online, and there's a bunch of people saying that kind of thing, I went to Scotland and I got stuck. I went to
Oh
England and
God.
I visited for 3 days, and then we're stuck in the hotel room or we're stuck in the
Yeah.
basement of a friend's house or something. And so there was a fair amount of that. So there's grief and loss around the excitement of a visit and then the failure somehow of that visit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
The expectation and the sudden changes,
yeah. And then
the
how do you come
attachment, the
back from,
hope, and then the
oh,
removal.
yeah. Yeah. So it's really a lot of additional loss and grief around things like that.
Well,
Yeah.
and there's something that I don't think enough of us are talking about, and I think it bears worth mentioning. And that has to do with the amount of energy that people who are immunocompromised, who are the most vulnerable, still have to do around this. Like my
Mm-hmm.
mom has 50% lung capacity.
Mm.
I have friends who have other forms of immunodeficiency. And what I hear from all of them is how exhausted they are having to self-advocate and how exhausting it is at how hard people push back on something which is still very possibly life-threatening for them.
Yeah.
Like to other people, it might not be a big deal. It may just, for me, it's probably, yeah, I've got asthma, but the truth is I'm relatively healthy. And if I were to get COVID, it would probably be not that big of a deal, but I'm scared, I'm scared of passing it along to my mom if I go and see her. And so there's just this enormous burden on people who are already vulnerable.
I agree. And I think the other piece around that is the health situation.
Mm-hmm. Uh-oh.
I'm so sorry for some reason the sound. Let's turn that off. My apologies for repeating myself there.
That's okay. The technical difficulties.
Your apologies for repeating yourself.
My technical issues.
Your technical issues.
We're good. Okay, so where I was going was for us in Canada, and I think certainly there are people I know in the US who don't have, who may have some health insurance. It's not always great, or they have health insurance, but it's still a negotiation, or of course they may not have any health insurance. And so that plays into this picture of how your health is doing generally and what you're going to be able to do about it. And we have in Canada a real shortage across the country of family physicians. And it's actually quite a problem in my province, which means that you're then going into a walk-in clinic if you're lucky, or you have a telehealth call if you're lucky, or you're waiting for one. And so to get sick is a bit more fraught. And in emergency, where you may have normally, or in the past, normally, the previous normal, you might have waited, say, 3 hours. Now you're waiting 6, or you're waiting overnight, for if you have to have, if you're slated for surgery or some other, so it's really, it works, and we're very lucky, but it's also more difficult than it used to be.
Yeah.
And care isn't as integrated, and there's a lot of elders in our communities that they've had doctors who've retired, they've lost their doctor, and they're losing their doctor at a really tough time in their lives, right? When their care is only increasing and their risk vis-a-vis things like COVID is just getting worse. So it's
100%.
Yeah, so that creates a lot of stress for all of us, people who love our elders and people who are at risk. So that's playing into, I think, the higher anxiety around this. What risks do I take?
Yeah. Well, those
how
questions.
serious are those risks?
Yeah.
Right. Not just for me, but for other people.
Right.
What are the possible complications down the road? Maybe I feel safe, but somebody around me is at a higher risk, and maybe they're afraid to say something because they've gotten too much pushback.
Yeah, because it's hard to continue to be the person who says, look, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to wear a mask, or I'm not going to come to your get
Or
together.
can you all wear a mask around me?
Yes.
Which,
exactly.
I mean, in my mind, that's such a minor ask. Yeah. But the amount of pushback people give on that is incredible.
Yeah. And there's also the fact that there are certain people I've known, and, therapists, we will talk about this kind of thing, where you have certain clients who've had trauma. And so wearing a mask is actually really difficult. Wearing a mask is really activating for them. And so, their way of managing things is to either, if they're otherwise young and healthy, to not worry about it maybe. And so that ask is harder for them. Or if they are concerned, they're going to be the sort of person who's then going to be like, I'll only meet outdoors. And I'm just going to remind people, those of us who are in Seattle or in just generally the northwest part of the coast, it is called a temperate rainforest for a reason. So you can get rained out, and so that makes getting together with people also more difficult. So, yeah.
Well, and this is something that I again, I want to throw this out to the chat. Maybe I'm alone on this. Maybe I'm not alone on this. I don't know, but I'm wondering if any of you are dealing with any sort of lingering resentment or a loss of trust, because I can think of several people who I've known for decades, and throughout the pandemic, I see pictures on Instagram. I see pictures on Facebook, on Twitter, whatever, on all of their socials of them like throwing keggers.
Yeah. And
people doing keg stands and sharing the same spigot at the high point of the pandemic. And, I'm finding it hard to let go of some of that resentment. Yeah. Because, there's part of me that's looking like, yo, I don't trust you anymore. You're having big parties when the rest of us are trying to hunker down. You're the people we're trying to protect. Yeah. And you're just, it kind of feels like a group project with higher stakes.
I know, it kind of is like, this is why we can't have nice things sort of feeling.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's that joke of, when I die, I want all the people I had a group project with in school to be my pallbearers so they can let me down one last time. It feels like that, but with way higher stakes.
Yeah. I think that's a really tough one. What's interesting is, so when COVID started, I did a little bit of sort of historic research, and it was out there, right? We were all super curious about how did people handle the Spanish flu, and
not well.
Not well. And Martin Luther, he of the 95 thesis from way back when, had actually written a statement, because during the plague, people were apparently taking chances that he really didn't agree with. And he was like, look, just stay home. Why are you out there? Why are you visiting with people? This is a really big risk. And I think humans, there are kind of two sort of psychological processes. And one of them is hunker down, hermit, stay safe, wear masks, do all the things, right? I'm going to be as careful as I can possibly be and the best citizen I can be. And then the other extreme is like, I might die tomorrow. Woo, let's party. I don't care because anything could happen now. The kind of rug's been pulled from under.
Yeah, that sort of YOLO
societally
attitude.
speaking. Exactly. And I think the problem is, of course, boom, right? We're in complete conflict. And then there's people who are like, well, I'll do this part, but I won't do that part. And I can't do the other part. And all of that is out there, with a lot of feeling, all around. So.
Well, this is, I'm going to only speak for me, but again, I suspect other people are going to resonate with certain parts of this, but this has ended up being kind of a soft reset on my expectations for people. Like at this point, if I know that I have less energy to socialize, I get more over, I mean, being autistic, I get overwhelmed to begin with, but I get more overwhelmed more quickly than I used to around people. I am rationing my socialization time, and I'm really being deliberate. Like, who are the people I really want to socialize with? Who are the people who truly add something to my life? Who are the people who I trust to have my back? If things, as a former supervisor of mine, the excrement impacts the oscillating air impeller. Who gets my time if my time is this precious? And I've been more selective about that. And I've heard similar from other people.
Yeah, I think that's there's two pieces to that. There's that decision around the socializing and being more selective. And then the other piece is, okay, so what am I going to do with my time if I'm not socializing? And we did see this, sort of real jump in creative hobbies. And my hope
Raise your hand if you did sourdough.
I somehow didn't.
Well, in fairness, I was doing
bake bread,
sourdough years ago, but
oh well, excuse me.
It just brought.
Sorry. This was learned professionally, darling. So.
Oh, fine. Mitra's like, I did sourdough before. It was cool.
I sowed and also I reaped. No, yeah, and I tried to get back to knitting, but all I could do was a blanket. But anyway, the point is that how did we learn to be alone better? How did we learn not just to cope with loneliness and build up our resources, but how did we actually learn to appreciate alone time? And did we? And how was that? And did we have resources to make it good, right? Because not everyone did. Some people lost their jobs and some people
100%.
were really struggling. And it's hard not to feel a lot of trauma around that and sort of go, it's fine for you to go and buy expensive yarn, but
right.
Right?
Yeah.
So, everybody had different experiences in terms of their being alone, being lonely, the capacity to invest in what that alone time looked like in terms of hobbies and things to try.
Well, I mean, and we're also talking about a reevaluation of what loneliness actually is. And I know we've mentioned this in some of our previous episodes that something I picked up in the academic chapter I read during the pandemic was that there's a difference between isolation and loneliness. Well, isolation is simply a numbers game. Loneliness is a functional thing. So you could be surrounded by people, but if you perceive something broken in your social network, you're still lonely. But there are plenty of people and who have fewer people around them, but they find richness and fulfillment within that social network, and so they're not actually lonely. And this has been a conversation that I know you and I have had, Mitra and Treavor as well, and others have had. I've certainly had with my clients. What does it mean to have social fulfillment as we sort of establish our new normal? Because old normal ain't coming back.
No, there are some things that really have shifted, some for the better. I think there's much more consent around even hugs and hugging.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I actually really like that.
I appreciate how many people
so
are
much.
like, it's okay to hug. I appreciate that so much.
Yeah.
Even though I'm a hugger, I still appreciate it.
Me too.
God.
Me too. And even if I'm a hugger, I might not want to hug everyone. The fact that it's now normalized to not hug quite as much is okay.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
My autistic soul just goes, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have to touch people as much.
Right. And I think that brings up a really interesting point. How do we feel about touch now, right?
Yeah.
It's not as normal to shake hands even. And how are we with that, right? So there's a lot of social conventions around touch that have kind of dissipated. It's not like they're not occasionally there, but there's less obligation
But real quick thing on that before we go to the disclaimer. Like around like late 2021, early 2022, like I would like shake people's hand or something like that, and I'd like try to slyly do the hand sanitizer. I give nothing now. I'm just like, shake your hand. Yep, nope, just doing that while I'm talking to you now. Do not care.
You just go full David Hyde Pierce in Frasier of just like you've got your germ chamois.
If I could go full monk on that and just have someone hand me the thing, I would. It would be great. All right, we're gonna take a quick moment to remind our viewers of our disclaimer, and then we'll be back to talk a little bit more about this topic. So stick right there. Be right back. Bye. Okay, bye.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment. Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Hey, we're back. Thanks for sticking with us. We had a little technical difficulty there. Also, Mitra has now blessed us with Mobo, and I'm just happy with it. So yeah, you guys y'all got your Mobo. Mobo is my next social media
Yes.
screen name, says Obo.
Yes.
Lauren.
Yes. Full mobile.
Maximum Mobo.
Maximo.
At some point, we just need like freeform jazz classical oboe with Lauren in a little circle in the corner, PBS style, and we're gonna groove over that with psych knowledge. That's what we're gonna do.
That's it.
Freestyle oboe.
Oh boy.
Probo.
Yeah. Also, for folks that are in chat right now, Obo Lauren in chat is the one playing the oboe and reading the disclaimer. So thank you, Lauren, as always, for that. But more Mobo. Okay, so we wanted to take a moment for the last part of this before we get into any viewer questions that we have. Remember, you can put your question into the chat, question : and then your question, and our awesome mods will grab it and put it in a little text doc. But we want to talk about, what do we do?
What do we do?
God, I grumble.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
feel like I'm gonna do my best Roy Kent impression at this point. I'm just gonna start going and start swearing a lot.
Yeah, I think that we have to recognize that if someone has different boundaries than we do around this, we have to respect those boundaries.
Yeah.
We don't have to love those boundaries, but we do have to appreciate why their perspective of things. And of course that will determine how close we stay, or whether what we've learned about them through the pandemic, their choices, whether that jives for us. And I think certainly politically it was very divisive.
Yeah.
We all know that, and we've all felt it in various ways. And that's just hard on human relationships, right?
Yeah.
It's a very unusual and specific circumstance in which to see people, but it was also kind of a global experience. And so it's kind of a lot to get through. And it is traumatizing. And I think that's a piece to remember too. Be kind to yourself and to others, because that was traumatizing. That was difficult.
Yeah.
That's not, it's not going to immediately just kind of go back to anything. It has to go forward to something.
Please.
Well, because I think I really lucked out with the majority of my friends where we kind of all accepted our levels of it, like, because there were levels of it. There were people were masking and whatnot, but in different situations and whatnot. Like more recently, when we go to the bar, my wife and I have a mask on when we go into the bar, and there's an outdoor area where we hang out, and so we'll wear the mask into the bar and then take it off when we get out there and we're around our friends. Some of our friends aren't doing that as much anymore, and that's okay. We're just it's just this comfort level thing. My friends know that my wife and I are the more cautious of the group. But that has, like, one of my friends got early tickets for the D&D movie, and he was like, "Hey, I know you still haven't gone back to a theater. I got these, and I do have an extra one if you want to go, but I totally get if you don't." And I turned it down, and he was like, "That's totally fine. I just want to put it out there." And that was probably one of the most like the best feeling interactions I had around it, where it was like, "Hey, I'm
how
still
accepting."
Yeah, it was like, I'm still offering this to you, but I know there's a high chance you don't want to, but I still want to offer that to you because I do think it's something you would enjoy, but I also understand where you're at right now." And that was great. That was a great interaction to have with one of my friends about this.
So that was an offer for both inclusion and acceptance without hesitation.
Yeah, double acceptance. It was great.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think about one of the questions I have to ask myself regularly, and I hope other people have a really honest conversation around this with themselves as well, is if other people have differing needs or asks around the pandemic. And for some reason, I'm hesitant to meet those needs. Having an honest conversation about why. Now for some people, they can't put on masks. They have trauma, they have panic attacks. There's legitimate medical reasons. And then there are some people who just find it inconvenient. And I ask myself, if I'm not willing to meet my friend where their needs are, is it because I can't or because it's inconvenient?
Yeah.
And if it's inconvenient, well, then I have to have a different conversation with myself of, come on, man.
Yeah.
Come on. You're better than that.
I agree. I also think I do see a difference in people who've had COVID and their anxiety level around it, particularly if it was mild versus their anxiety, obviously, if it was severe, or if there was, trauma associated with maybe giving someone else COVID and what happened there. Like, there's lots of stories.
Guilt.
Yeah. So if you've had COVID and gone through that experience and come out the other side and it seems to have all been fine, versus, long COVID or other issues with it, versus someone who hasn't had COVID and the anxiety level there. Because if you haven't had COVID, you don't know how your body's going to respond to it.
Yeah.
and you don't know if you're going to be okay. And I think that adds a level of stress. So I think we need to be.
You preach you're preaching
Yeah.
to the converted here. That's exactly what I question, and part of the reason I'm still fairly cautious. Because I've managed to dodge it so far, and that's not a moral. That's not bragging.
I'm knocking on wood. I'm in the same spot.
No,
Yeah.
that's not me bragging. That's not me claiming any sort of moral superiority. This is this is a numbers game, and that's part of my anxiety.
It definitely it had two effects. When I had it last summer and couldn't visit with family, the stakes had been so high, and I was so devastated. There's nothing worse than seeing your family sort of 100 yards away as they drop off food or whatever, and that's it. That's your whole interaction after not seeing them for 3 years. And being able, we FaceTimed and we did a few things, but it was very, very difficult. And it really added to my upset around it, but also, and this is, I think, quite a common response, but I'll speak for me, I felt ashamed of catching COVID. Like, obviously it's around and it's so contagious and it's so blah, blah, all of these things. But I think we tried so hard not to catch it before coming. And it was, it was my eldest son's first visit to see his great aunt and uncle in years, like not even 3 years, more like 5 or 6. And he dearly loves, particularly my uncle, his great uncle. And so it was just so disappointing. And it felt like this sort of personal failure that we caught it. So that's an interesting thing too, I think, is like, how do we interpret our experience of it, or not having had it yet, or dodging a bullet versus, knock on wood. I get that, there was something about having had it and being okay and going, okay, it's not the end of the world. That's okay. But it's a tough one, right?
Well, I mean, for you, it's not the end of the world, but I'm like,
right.
And
I'm
I think
very
about
aware.
Exactly. My dad, my mom has her lung condition. My dad is a 5-time cancer survivor. I don't even want to know what chemo has done to him over. So it's just incredible to think about what could potentially happen. But the other thing, and this is the other conversation I have with myself all the time, is what are my expectations of normal? Do I expect, I think Mitra put it so beautifully earlier in today's show of, am I thinking backwards of moving back to normal, or am I moving forward into a different normal? And can I accept that normal, or am I just holding on to something? Am I holding on to this expectation of something that can't return? And that's a big question I have to ask myself in all of my social interactions, because, especially for people who, like, the guy who, when I was married, was the best man at my wedding. I hadn't seen him in 4 years. And this is a guy I've known since I was 13 or something. And it's like, we have to get to know each other again. Because we're different people now.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This is for some people, this has been a very life-changing experience with a great deal of grief and loss. And it's not so easy to just go, it's over, because we're changed in it. So,
so we have one of your questions that I do want to get to. I do want to point out real quick that someone in the chat was saying how, like, they haven't gotten sick since they were masking and everything like that. I'm in the same boat. I, like, not only am I paranoid about COVID, I'm just paranoid about getting a cold, because I know it is going to whoop my butt the first time I get one again, because oh boy. But I want to get to Reaver01, who says, question, and put in parentheses, opinion. How much has this shift out of and back into socializing has changed the viewpoint of what activities need interdependency with others, and how much you have learned that things are better with independency?
Wow, that is a complicated and excellent question.
Yeah, it was a good one. Yeah, I had a little trouble reading it.
So I'm making sure I understand that as we've shifted into whatever our new normal is.
Like essentially like things that we before were like, we would do this with people. Now we're like, oh, I don't actually need to be with people to do that.
So can we add to that and say, this is something I would do with people in person, and now I'm quite happy to do it online?
Yeah.
That's another level of it, right?
I'm not going to lie. There's been a few things that I've gone to socially that I've in my head been like, this could have been an email.
This could have been a Zoom call.
Yeah, I would like to see pointless work meetings die a quick death. Like, honestly, I don't. Yeah, I think also that's actually an interesting question, because there's an individual piece to it, but there's also oddly a corporation kind of piece to it. For instance, my association for counselors used to put on a big AGM meeting. They would fly people who were on the council or senior people. They would actually fly them into our city for the AGM. And it was a thing, right? It was a thing. Money got spent on it. Hotels got booked for it, blah, blah, blah. Now, obviously since COVID, but I got an email saying it would be between 12 and 1 o'clock on such day, and feel free to register and attend, and it'll be live and you can still vote on things, but that's how it's going to be. 1 hour online, right?
Yes.
Right? And so that's a huge change. The downside, we don't get to meet people in person and maybe forge greater connections. The upside, Christ, did I really want to sit through that? Therefore, this is a way to do it that's much more, much quicker and easier. And maybe I would have thought about not participating, but now I will. So it all depends on who you are and how you felt about doing the AGM in the first place. Did you feel committed to going, and will you therefore miss it? I'm the kind of person who's like, give it to me online.
Yeah. It's
optional. Great. That's what I'm doing. So
do I need to drive to be there?
Right. So I'm more selective about those group activities.
This is nothing that to do with PsyD. It was just a thought that crossed my mind the other day that I said out loud to my wife while we were driving somewhere. I was like, one of the things that I really love about working remote, I've never had to do a lunch meeting.
Yeah.
I'm going to start doing those again this month.
Really?
Yeah, no, I totally have it picked out who it's going to be with too.
Oh, interesting.
Oh yeah.
I better not get an invite.
I think another thing, you better not. Yeah, I'm staying home with my screen off. I think the other one though that's interesting is that there was, I don't know how it's resolved because I'm under a rock now, and I haven't listened to the news in like the last couple of days. But there was this federal workers strike in Canada because people did not want to go back into work full time.
Yeah.
They some of them have been okay with, look, I have a government job, I'll go in 2 days a week or whatever, but please don't make me come back into the office full time. Why are we doing this? Which I think is really interesting, because how do we navigate that? There are some people who are like, please God, I have to be in the office, I'm miserable. And others who are like, no, this is really working for me.
I do it. I actually have a workshop on that.
Excellent. Because I think that there's this idea, which frankly, I think is archaic, which is like, you're more productive if you come into the office and I can keep an eye on you. How infantilizing is that?
I'm way more productive here.
Right. The thing I miss that I do hear from people is, I just started a new job. I've never met anyone in person. And it's really hard to get my bearings. And it's hard because I would have to actually set up a kind of formal meeting, or can you give me 10 minutes, as opposed to we both walk into the kitchen to get a cup of coffee or whatever, and I can casually ask. So I think that puts up more pressure on people, particularly if they're trying to adjust to a work environment.
Yeah. The putting on workshop leader hat for right now. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Workshop leader hat. Hold on. There you go. Okay.
Okay.
So my thinking cap.
That's what I usually wear too.
So
we're obviously the same.
It depends.
No.
All right. So there's not one that's really better or worse. it really depends on the people and how are we measuring certain things, because productivity has many metrics.
Yep.
Yeah. Agreed.
So yeah, thinking hat off.
Okay.
I think some people do miss a need to be in person, and that's part of how they want to do their lives, and that is important. Yeah.
I don't understand them, but I know they exist. Well, we have to start wrapping things up because we got another show coming up. Yeah, friends, where can people find you all on the interwebs if they would like to do so?
So, of course, at Mitra Jordan on Twitter and mitrajordan.com for other kinds of communication. Feel free to reach out. Unlike Dr. Long Italian Name Reasons, that's where you find me.
I get around.
Yeah, you get around.
Round and round, round we go.
Everywhere.
No, I'm the Dr. B, TheeDoctor, B as in boy, on all of the socials. But more importantly, go follow TakeThis.org. We have a bunch of really cool resources, including we just released an entire page on content creator burnout for free yesterday. The first part of a 3-part video series was also released yesterday. And so go check that out at TakeThis.org.
And you can follow me on Twitter at the Treavor. There's an A hiding in there. And I can finally say this on this show. I'm a content designer and writer for Idle Champions, The Forgotten Realm. So you can see my work literally tomorrow when Nixie comes to the game. My first bit of content was her equipment.
Yeah.
So you can go read some funny things that I wrote.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Well done. Yeah.
Thank you to Mars and Jay for doing a fantastic job modding today. And thank you all for joining us for this episode. I believe this week's schedule is normal. I don't know anymore because I don't work on the schedule. So you got to go see what Sean put up on our Twitter, our Discord, and our Reddit and to keep up to date on that. But yeah, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Champion Psychology, the first episode of Season 8. We'll be back next week with more things to talk about. So we'll see you then. Until then, take care of yourself.
Bye, everyone.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.